Okay, so today we will start a new system of our body. That's the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system is responsible for defensive functions. That means immunity of our body. So, lymphatic system provides immunity to our body. First, today we'll talk about the parts of the lymphatic system, and then we'll talk about the lymph vessels. Lymphatic system is a circulatory system, like your cardiovascular system. So, since it is a circulatory system, it has vessels. Without vessels, the fluid will not be able to circulate, right? So, lymphatic vessels or lymph vessels are important parts of this system. So, we'll talk about the vessels. Then, in the fluid, you will find two types of cells. They fight against the antigens. What are the cells? T cells and B cells. We'll talk about those two types of cells. Then we'll talk about the lymphoid follicles. What are the lymphoid follicles? We will see. Then we'll talk about lymph organs. What are the lymph organs in our body? Lymph organs are spleen, thymus, and tonsils. We'll talk about those organs, and then we'll talk about a couple of other things: Peyer's patches and lacteals. What are those structures in the lymphatic system? We will see that. Okay, so the parts of the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system consists of 4 different types of structures, not 3, 4. Okay, I change it to 4. So 4 different types of structures. A network of lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels are also called lymphatics. So lymphatics are the lymphatic vessels. Then inside the vessels, you will find the fluid. That fluid is called lymph. So lymph is the fluid, lymphatic is the vessel. Okay? And then you will find lymph nodes in our lymphatic system. Lymph nodes are tiny, small, solid, round structures present everywhere in our lymphatic system. Many small, tiny, solid, round structures, those are lymph nodes. And then lymph organs. Lymph organs are only few and much larger than lymph nodes. Okay, so lymph nodes are what? Many in our body, present everywhere throughout the lymphatic system, and those are what? Tiny, small, round, solid structures. Okay, and lymph organs are what? Only few, much larger, and there is another important difference between lymph nodes and lymph organs. Lymph nodes are solely responsible for immune functions, but lymph organs have other important functions too in our body. So lymph nodes are only responsible for the immune function, but lymph organs perform immune functions as well as they have other important functions in our body. So, lymphatic system is the structural basis of the immune system. How the fluid comes into the lymphatic vessels? From where the fluid gets into the lymphatic vessels? We will see that. So, if you see the tissue of our body, you will find many cells, because we know that tissue is nothing but the collection of cells, similar functioning cells. And in between the cells, you already know that we have interstitial spaces. So, in between the cells, those spaces are called interstitial spaces. And the fluid is called interstitial fluid. So, the fluid in the interstitial spaces of tissues is called the interstitial fluid. And the lymph or lymph fluid is nothing but interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid is taken into the lymphatic vessels, and that fluid then circulates inside the lymphatic vessels. Okay? So, how the fluid is taken into the lymphatic vessels? If you see the lymph capillaries, these are the end parts of lymph capillaries, and the lymph capillaries collect the fluid. So, from the interstitial space, the fluid enters into the lymph capillary. Okay? And then that fluid circulates inside the lymphatic vessels. So, we will see the lymph capillary and how the fluid goes in. This is the end of lymph capillary. And if you see the lymph capillary, the wall of lymph capillary has many doors, and those doors are guarded by valves. So there are many openings, but those openings are guarded by valves, controlled by valves. And those mini valves are present in the lymph capillaries. So flap-like mini valves you see here. So when the valves open in one direction. Okay, valves open in one direction, will take the fluid in. So see here, if this is inside, the valves will open like this. We'll let the fluid get in. From where? From the interstitial spaces. Make sense? So from the interstitial spaces, the fluid will be taken inside the capillary like this. And if the fluid wants to come out, it won't be able to come out because the valves will close like this. So it will open in one direction. Only will let the fluid get in inside the capillaries. So one way, flap-like mini valves control the doors. So the fluid can get in but cannot come out. If the fluid goes in and comes out, doesn't make sense, right? So fluid will only get in. The difference between, if you see the blood capillary, you have already seen the blood capillary, and lymphatic capillary, the difference is, number one, in case of blood capillary, you have seen that blood capillaries form capillary bed, right? They are connected, form network. They are connected to each other and form the capillary bed. In case of lymph capillaries, they are not connected to each other. They enter into the tissue separately. So they have blind ends, dead ends. They are not connected. The ends are free. Okay? They are not connected to each other. Number one. Number two, in case of lymph capillary, you will see many flap-like mini valves. Those are not present in blood capillaries. You know that. Another thing, outside of the capillary, you will see filaments. And filaments keep the capillaries open. So the filaments, one end of those filaments are attached to the wall of the capillary, and other end is attached to the connective tissue, surrounding connective tissue. So they basically pull the wall from the sides and keep the capillary open. Otherwise, the capillary will collapse. Okay? So just keep it open and keep the capillaries in right locations. So that's the filaments. Okay, so you got three important differences between the blood capillaries and lymph capillaries. I am repeating again. Number one, in case of blood capillaries, they form anastomosis network. That's the capillary bed. In case of lymphatic capillaries, you don't see. You see the capillaries are dead-ended or blind-ended. Number two, they have valves. The lymphatic capillaries have many mini valves, flap-like mini valves. They will open in one direction, only let the fluid get in. In capillaries, you don't see, blood capillaries, you don't see those valves. In case of lymph capillaries, you see the filaments, they anchor the capillaries, but in case of blood capillaries, you don't see those. Okay, so after the lymph capillaries collect the fluid, interstitial fluid, takes the interstitial fluid inside, the fluid will enter into the collecting vessels. So collecting vessels will get the lymph or fluid from the capillaries. Okay, so collecting vessels. Then the fluid will enter into the trunks, lymphatic trunks, and then from the trunk the fluid will enter into the lymph ducts. So first from the capillaries will collect the fluid from interstitial fluid, will drain the fluid into the collecting vessels, and then from the collecting vessels the fluid will enter into the trunks, and from the trunks the fluid will enter into the ducts. Okay, so that's how the fluid circulates. Then the ducts are the largest lymphatic vessels, and the ducts will drain the lymph into the large veins in our body. So you see that lymph, that fluid will finally be given to the blood, right? Inside the vein we have blood. So the lymph will finally, after the lymph, that fluid circulates throughout the body, finally the lymph will go into the blood, where inside the large veins in our body, close to the heart. Okay. So here, the same thing that I said, how the fluid will circulate. Lymphatic vessels, large lymphatic vessels are similar to veins in our body, but there are a few differences. What are the differences between lymphatic vessels and veins? The lymphatic vessels have thinner wall than the veins in our body. We know that the wall of a vein is thinner than the wall of an artery, but lymphatic vessels have even thinner. Okay, so thinner than the wall of the vein. More internal valves are present inside the lymphatic vessels. We know that large veins in our body have valves, right? Particularly the lower extremity veins, large veins have many valves, but lymphatic vessels have even more valves inside. Anastomose more frequently. the lymphatic vessels, large vessels, they get connected to each other more than the veins. Now, there are two sets of lymphatic vessels in our body, superficial and deep. The superficial lymphatic vessels run along the veins in our body. We know that veins in our body are more superficial, right, than the arteries. So, superficial lymphatic vessels run along the veins, and deep lymphatic vessels run along the arteries in our body. Okay, so those are the important information about the lymphatic vessels. Here you see the end of lymphatic capillaries, capillary end. Okay, so we know that after the lymph circulates, the large lymphatic vessels are the ducts. Ducts are the large lymphatic vessels. Two largest lymphatic vessels, lymphatic ducts are the thoracic duct and right lymphatic duct. Those are the largest two lymphatic vessels, thoracic duct and right lymphatic duct. They collect the lymph from all other vessels, lymphatic vessels, and drain the lymph into the large veins in our body. So the right lymphatic duct collects the lymph or fluid from 1/4 part of the body, and thoracic duct collects lymph from 3/4 part of our body. So from 1/4 part of our body, the lymph will enter into the right lymphatic duct. Which 1/4 part? If you divide your body into 4 quadrants like this, from the upper right quadrant, the lymph will enter into the right lymphatic duct, and from rest 3/4, the lymph will enter into the thoracic duct. That's why thoracic duct is much bigger, larger than the right lymphatic duct, because thoracic duct receives the lymph from 3/4 part of the body. Right lymphatic duct only from 1/4 part of the upper right quadrant of the body. Okay. Now, after these two ducts collect the lymph from the whole body, they drain the lymph into the large vein in our body, where at the junction of internal jugular and subclavian. So the ducts will drain the lymph at the junction of internal jugular vein and subclavian vein. So we have two internal jugulars, right and left, and two subclavian. So this is the thoracic duct that will receive the lymph from 3/4 part of your body, and this is the right lymphatic duct. It will receive the lymph from upper right quadrant. That means what? Half of your head, half of your right half of your neck, and right half of your thorax and upper lip, right? That's the upper right quadrant. Okay. So from those areas, the lymph will enter into the right lymphatic duct, and now you see the thoracic duct will drain the lymph at the junction of internal jugular and subclavian here. It will drain the lymph into the vein here, and right lymphatic duct will drain the lymph at the junction of right internal jugular and right subclavian here. Okay, so that's how the lymph will enter into the blood. Okay, now the thoracic duct is located on the vertebral column. If you go to see the cadaver lab, it's very easy to find the thoracic duct because it just rests on the vertebral column like this. Okay, and the lower end of the thoracic duct has an expanded part, dilated part, wider part. That part is called cisterna chyli. My favorite question, I may ask you, what is cisterna chyli? It is the expanded lower end of the thoracic duct, or dilated part of the lower end of the thoracic part. Do you see cisterna chyli here? Okay. So this is the cisterna chyli. And cisterna chyli receives lymph from the lower part of the body. Okay, from the lower part of the body, the lymphatic vessels will drain the lymph into the cisterna chyli. Okay, here you see again the thoracic duct on the vertebral column, and the right lymphatic duct only in the upper part and in the right side of the vertebral column. And both of them drain the lymph at the junction of subclavian and internal jugular. Okay. So that's the lymphatic vessels. Now we will talk about the lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are the main warriors, fighters against the antigens. So lymphocytes are the main fighters or warriors. Two types of lymphocytes are present in our body: T lymphocytes or T cells, B lymphocytes or B cells. Now, they fight against the antigens differently. T lymphocytes engulf the microorganisms by phagocytosis. So, T lymphocytes kill the microorganisms by phagocytosis, and B lymphocytes fight against the microorganisms or antigens by producing antibodies. So two different mechanisms, right? One, T cells directly gets attached to the antigens and engulf them, eat them by phagocytosis and destroy them. But B lymphocytes will produce antibody. But B lymphocytes, to produce antibody, most of the B lymphocytes will be converted to plasma cells. First, they will be converted to plasma cells. The reason is plasma cells can produce plenty of antibodies. Okay? Plenty of antibodies could be produced by plasma cells. B lymphocytes can produce antibodies, but small amount. Okay? So a small amount of antibodies will be produced by B lymphocytes, but most of the B lymphocytes will do what? Will be converted to plasma cells, and because plasma cells can produce plenty of antibodies. Okay, So like, you can fight with your enemy in different ways, right? If you see that your enemy is not very dangerous and weaker than you, you are giant and more powerful, then you will grab, okay, the enemy. But if you think that your enemy is more powerful and could be dangerous, more dangerous, then you won't go close to him. You will shoot the enemy with gun. So some T lymphocytes, they grab the microorganisms and by phagocytosis and kill them. Some lymphocytes, they produce the antibody, and antibody will go to the enemy and will kill them. So they are killing the enemies by producing antibodies, right? Okay. Now we'll talk about the lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are important parts of the lymphatic system, and I told you lymph nodes are small, round, solid structures. The many lymph nodes are present throughout the lymphatic system. If you cut the lymph node and see inside, you will see clearly, you will see two areas inside the lymph node. Outer part is called the cortex and inner part is called the medulla. So if you cut the lymph node and see inside, you cut the lymph node and see inside, the outer part is called the cortex and inner part is called the medulla. So this part is the medulla and outer part, this part is the cortex. Okay. Now the lymph nodes perform two important functions to provide immunity. What are those? First, when the lymph, that fluid will enter into the lymph nodes will filter the fluid and separate the enemies, antigens, separate the antigens. If in the fluid you have microorganisms, the lymph nodes will do what? Separate the microorganisms from the fluid by filtering. That is number one. Number two, lymph nodes are filled with lymphocytes, T and B lymphocytes, as well as macrophages and plasma cells. And all those cells are the fighter cells, right? They fight, you know that. T lymphocytes fight, B lymphocytes fight, plasma cells fight, and macrophages, they engulf, right? Fight. So all those cells are present inside the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes will do two things. First, separate the antigens or enemies, and then the cells of lymph nodes will come forward and will kill them, right? So kill them. So it is very efficient way to kill the enemies, right? If they are everywhere, it is difficult to fight against them. So first, if you separate them and then attack, you can kill them easily. Okay, so that's the function of the lymph nodes. So here you see inside the lymph node two areas you will find. The outer part is the cortex. So this is the outer part, that is the cortex, and this is the inner part. This part is called the medulla. In the cortex, you will find lymphoid follicles, very important structures. Lymphoid follicles are present in the cortex. What are the lymphoid follicles? Lymphoid follicles are cluster of cells, cluster or aggregated cells are present in the lymphoid follicles. Many cells are together, packed together in the lymphoid follicles. So lymphoid follicles are the structures present in the cortex, and they are heavily packed with the cells. Those T cells, B cells, those cells are present in high density there. Okay. Now in the cortex you will find two structures, medullary cord and medullary sinus. Medullary cord is connective tissue cord and sinus is the spaces in which the fluid will accumulate. The fluid, lymph, will accumulate in the sinuses. You know, sinuses are the spaces. Okay. So now another important thing here you see that the lymphatic vessels, some lymphatic vessels are getting in and some lymphatic vessels are getting out. The lymphatic vessels, those are getting in, they are bringing the fluid inside the lymph node. And so these are the afferent lymphatic vessels. That means they are getting in. Afferent means coming in, arriving. So they are bringing, afferents are bringing the fluid or lymph inside the lymph node. And efferent starts with E, they are getting out, so they take the fluid out from the lymph node. Now the number, if you see the number, the afferent is more in number than the efferent. That is important because more fluid is getting in, then the amount of fluid is getting out. Like you have a container, through 5 tubes the fluid or water is getting in, and through 2 tubes the water is getting out. So the water will stay longer time there. Make sense? The water will stay for longer time, and that is very important to complete the function of the lymph nodes, because lymph nodes filter the fluid, right? So to filter and kill the microorganisms, it takes some time. So that kind of arrangement, afferent and efferent, is helpful to keep the fluid for longer period inside the lymph node. Now you can think that if the fluid goes out slowly and comes more, then it will get filled with fluid, right? Eventually, because fluid is getting out slowly, but more fluid is getting in. If that happens, the pressure will increase inside and further entrance of fluid will be stopped. That's fine. But just know that less amount is getting out, more amount is getting in, and since the getting out is slow, the fluid will stay for longer time. That will give the time to the lymph nodes to filter the fluid carefully. Okay, and those cells are located in the lymphoid follicles. Those will come forward and will destroy the microorganisms or enemies. This is just the histology of a lymph node, just a part of the lymph node you see here, not the whole lymph node. So you see this part is light, this is the cortex, and this part is darker. This is the medulla, sorry, and this is the cortex. Outer part is the cortex, inner part is the medulla. And why outer part is darker? The reason is we know that lymphoid follicles are there, and you see very nice lymphoid follicles. You can see nicely present in the cortex. These round structures are the follicles, lymphoid follicles. Okay, and follicles are heavily filled with cells. You know that cells are heavily packed inside the follicles. That's why you see the follicles are darker. Okay, we have talked about that. Less efferent than afferent. Okay, now we'll talk about the lymph organs. I have mentioned the important differences between the lymph nodes and lymph organs at the beginning, right? Lymph nodes are very small and many present in our body and solely responsible for immune function, immunity. But lymph organs are only few, larger, and have other functions too. Okay, so what are the lymph organs? Lymph organs in our body are spleen, thymus and tonsils. So spleen, thymus and tonsils are lymph organs. First we will talk about the spleen. We have one spleen in our body. Spleen is the site of lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance and response. So the spleen, inside the spleen, the lymphocytes will proliferate, will multiply. Okay? So the number of lymphocytes will increase inside the spleen. Number one. Number two, the immunity of our body will be monitored by the spleen. And after monitoring, if the spleen thinks that I should produce more lymphocytes, it will proliferate the lymphocytes more. If it doesn't need to, it will not. So it will monitor and respond to accordingly in our body. Spleen cleanses the blood of aged cells and platelets and debris. So the dead cells, we know that inside the body some cells are getting old. For example, the best example is you are in NP2, you know that red blood cells. Red blood cells get old after lifespan is 90 to 120 days, right? And after they get old, they enter into the graveyards, right? And spleen is the graveyard. So the old cells will be destroyed there and will be cleaned out by the phagocytic cells. They will enter and remove them. Also, debris, like dead cells, you can say those are debris, right? Dead cells or other tissues will be, by phagocytic action of the cells, they will be removed from the body. Contains lymphocytes, because we know that that's the site for proliferation of lymphocytes, macrophages, and huge numbers of erythrocytes. Because red blood cells are erythrocytes, so they will be present in the spleen. Structure of the spleen. If you see inside the spleen, you will see clearly two areas. One area will look red and another area looks white. The area looks red is called the red pulp, and the area looks white, that is the white pulp. You can see actually by naked eye without the microscope. You can, if you cut the spleen, you can see the red area and white area. Okay, so red pulp and white pulp. Now, if I ask you why the red pulp area looks red, because more what? Blood. More blood is there, right? Blood will make the area red. So if you see here inside the spleen, this is the red pulp area will look red, and this area is the white pulp area. Now, why red pulp looks red? Because there are many sinuses there, and sinuses will get filled with blood. So the sinuses are filled with blood. That's why that area looks red. Okay. In the white pulp area, here you will see the central artery. That's the large artery inside the spleen, and no sinuses. Sinuses are the spaces, but no sinuses are there, so no blood can accumulate there. Only the large artery is there. Okay, so that area looks white. And the red pulp area has many sinuses, spaces there, and those spaces get filled with blood. That's why that area looks red. Okay. Just know those. Inside the spleen, you will find red pulp and white pulp. And central artery, around the central artery, you will find the white pulp area. Okay? And sinuses are present where? In the red pulp. Red pulp. Okay, so now we'll see the thymus. The thymus is very big in early life. If you see the fetus or a small infant, you'll see the thymus occupies the whole lower part of the neck as well as the whole upper part of the thorax. So whole lower part of the neck and whole upper part of the thorax is filled with thymus. So that's pretty big, very big. And gradually, as we get older, the thymus gets smaller. So thymus shrinks as the age increases, as we get older. Why we need huge thymus in very early life? Because in very early life, our immune system is very weak. You know that, right? Immune system is very weak. So thymus need to work more. That's why big thymus will be helpful. And as our immune system grows, develops in our body, the thymus shrinks because we don't need the thymus that much when the immune system is established in our body. So thymus is most active during the childhood. And in adults, the thymus is very small, like this size, and stays in the upper part of your thorax. Thymus, if you see the structure of a thymus, there are many lobes. Lobes are almost round structures are present in the thymus. Those are called thymic lobes. And if you see a lobe, it has an outer part, that is the cortex, and an inner part, that's the medulla. So thymus has many lobes, and each lobe has an outer part, that is the cortex, and an inner part, that's the medulla. Okay? The cortex contains densely packed lymphocytes and scattered macrophages. And medulla contains fewer lymphocytes, but another very important structure is present in the medulla, that is called Hassel's corpuscles or thymic corpuscles. Same thing. Hassel's corpuscle or thymic corpuscles. Those are present in the medulla, remember that, in the thymus. Okay, so since the cortex is the outer part and it has many lymphocytes, right? Many lymphocytes are present in the cortex. We see many cells make this area darker. And in the medulla, we have few lymphocytes. That's why this area is lighter. Remember, when you see something under the microscope, if the area has more cells, then that area, light will not be able to pass through, right, easily. So that area will look darker. If few cells are there, then the light will be able to pass through and that area will look lighter. Now, in the medulla, I told you that a very important structure that is called the thymic or Hassel's corpuscle is present in the medulla, right? And what's the function of an Hassel's corpuscle? It is not yet clear. The scientists are still working to find out the function of Hassel's corpuscle. But one thing has been proposed and it is kind of established that Hessel's corpuscles in the thymus are the locations where the T cells get their training. T cells must learn how to fight, right? Because they are the fighters, they fight, T cells, B cells. So where the T cells get their training? In the Hessel's corpuscles, and those corpuscles are located inside the of the thymus, middle of the thymus. And since the lymphocytes, some lymphocytes get training inside the thymus, those lymphocytes are called what? T lymphocytes. Thymus starts with T. So T lymphocytes get their training in the thymus. So before they come into thymus, they are not T lymphocytes, they are just lymphocytes, right? After they get their training inside the thymus, they become T lymphocytes, trained in the thymus. Okay. They learn what? Fight. How? They fight how? How they fight? Phagocytosis, right? They don't learn to produce antibody. They learn to do what?
Surrounded.
Phagocytosis. Okay. So that's the thymus. Now we'll talk about the tonsils. We have one spleen, one thymus, but we have few tonsils in our body. Not many, but few. Tonsils are simplest lymphoid organs. 3 sets of tonsils are prominent in our body. What are those 3 sets of tonsils? 3 pairs of tonsils. 3 pairs of tonsils. Palatine tonsils, lingual tonsils, and pharyngeal tonsils. Their names have been given based on the locations where they are located. Palatine tonsils are located at posterior end of the oral cavity, posterior to the palate. You know, the roof of the oral cavity is the palate, right? So if you go behind the palate, you will find the palatine tonsils. Lingual means what? Tongue. So lingual tonsils are located at the base of the tongue. That's why they are called lingual. Pharyngeal tonsils in the posterior wall of nasopharynx. So in the pharynx, which part of the pharynx? Nasopharynx. Pharynx has 3 parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. So nasopharynx is behind your nose, the part of the pharynx, and the tonsils are attached to the posterior surface, posterior wall of the nasopharynx. Okay. Tonsillectomy is very commonly heard, right? Sometimes tonsils cause problem. When they start to fight against the microorganisms, they get bigger, swell, and cause pain. So in that case, if it is really problematic, the doctors will remove the tonsil. Removal of tonsil is not harmful for us because you know that we have lymphoid tissues in many other places in our body. Okay. In many other locations we have lymphoid tissues, follicles, many follicles are heavily packed with the lymphocyte. So removal of tonsil will not really cause any problem in our immunity. Okay. Now, if you see the structure of a tonsil, you will see from the outer side some crypts. Crypts means the folds going inwards, folding going inwards from the outer surface. The folding is being going inwards. So those are the crypts. So you see here, this is the outer surface. The folds are being going inside, and those are the tonsillar crypts. So you will find many crypts in the structure of a tonsil. And many follicles. So you see the follicles are present in the lymphoid organs or lymph organs. So you see these round structures, these are the follicles. Okay. So many follicles are present in the tonsils. And follicles are the locations where the lymphocytes are heavily packed. You know that. And
Professor?
yes.
That's the structure of all tonsils or just the lingual?
Just only a small part of the tonsil.
Just the lingual? No, I mean the crypts and that's palatine, pharyngeal as well? All three?
Oh, the crypts are present in all tonsils, yes,
Okay.
all tonsils. And this is just a small part of the tonsil under the microscope. They make a slice of a small part of the tonsil. Here you see the locations, we have talked about that. Three pairs and their locations, palatine, pharyngeal and lingual. And if you just cut any of those, you will see the crypts. So tonsillar crypts are present in the tonsils, all tonsils, okay, not only the palatine tonsils. Okay. So you see here, in case of the lymph organs, the main thing is that main information is that lymph organs are filled with lymphoid follicles, right? Those are the main structures, because lymphoid follicles are filled with what? Lymphocytes, the cells. The follicles house the lymphocytes. So those are the main structures. Do you have any question?
Yeah, when they do a tonsillectomy, do they just cut like only the palatines, or do they cut the palatines and the...
Palatine is easy to remove, okay, because if you open the mouth and push the tongue down, you can see the palatine. You can put a forceps or scissors and cut it, take it out. It is very simple surgery, okay. But you, if you want to remove the pharyngeal is also not that difficult, but lingual tonsil is difficult. You have to go.
So every kid is different, like where there's hypertrophy, that's where they cut, or...
Yes, hypertrophy can increase the pressure inside the tonsil, and inflammation of the tonsil can cause inflammation of the tonsil, and that causes the problem. So inside the tonsil, the microorganisms fight and can cause inflammation. And the area inside your nose and mouth, those are the areas through which the microorganisms invade in our body most of the time, right? So the
mouth is very dirty.
Yeah, that's why they cause the problem to the tonsils.
The pharyngeal are also the adenoids, right? That's the same.
Adenoid, yeah, adenoid tonsils. Another name.
Pharyngeal.
Pharyngeal.
The ones behind the nose.
Adenoid tonsils. Did it say here anywhere?
I don't think so.
No. Yeah, so adenoid tonsil is another name of pharyngeal tonsil. Adenoid.
I had my tonsil.
Okay.
And they're at the palatine tonsil or
The adenoid is the pharyngeal.
pharyngeal?
Pairs, patches, and lacteals. Pairs, patches are aggregated lymphoid follicles in the wall of your intestine. So you see here that the lymphoid follicles can also be present outside of the lymphatic system, right? Because intestine is a part of your digestive system, right? But in the wall of your intestine, you have pairs, patches. Those are nothing but aggregated lymphoid follicles, many lymphoid follicles. So and intestine is very long. Okay, so the aggregated lymphatic follicles are present in many in number in the wall of the distal portion of the small intestine. You see here, one thing important is Peyer's patches are present in the distal portion of the small intestine. Why? You know that after you take the food, the absorption takes place in the intestine, right? So, in the upper part of the intestine, lot of absorption takes place, and the food, unnecessary stuffs will go down, right? Unnecessary stuffs will go down to the late part of the small intestine, the lower part of the small intestine. So, in that food stuff, the microorganisms could grow, or could, because it will stay there, and those are unnecessary stuffs, dirty stuffs. So the microorganisms can grow there and invade into your body. So in the wall of the late part of the intestine, you have the guards. The lymphatic follicles are guarding them and preventing the killing the microorganisms or anything bad component want to enter into your body. So basically, they are guarding. They are in the wall of the intestine, and they are, if any microorganisms enter into the small intestine, it will kill them. And that they should be there because we eat the food, and food is the one thing that takes a lot of microorganisms, can take a lot of microorganisms into your body.
What is it that kills them, the lymphocytes?
Yeah, the lymphatic follicles are filled with lymphocytes, right?
Right.
So they will guard the body. And since intestine contains the food and unnecessary food stuffs, that's why in the wall of the intestine you have the Peyer's patches. Okay. Similar structures, that means the lymphatic follicles, are present in the appendix. Appendix is a problematic, right? It causes problem. It doesn't have any importance in our body. It's an anomaly, developmental anomaly, and it doesn't have any function in our body. Only problem it causes is that inflammation occurs in the appendix, and appendicitis is the inflammation of appendix. And if the appendix bursts, then you know that inside your intestine, inside your digestive system, you have the food stuff. Unnecessary food stuffs are there, right? Those are like poison.
Right.
So they will spread throughout the peritoneal cavity and will cause shock to the patient.
So where is it exactly, the appendix?
Appendix is attached to the cecum. Cecum is the first part of your large intestine. Okay? So if it bursts, then intestinal stuff will come out, right? Enter into the peritoneal cavity. That is dangerous. Okay. Yes.
Does it store, I don't know how true it is, but I used to hear like it stores the food that cannot be digested. Like if you swallow something that cannot be digested, is it still stored in the appendix?
Stored?
Mm-hmm.
Appendix is like this, very small. Okay?
Uh-huh.
So only the intestinal stuff will go there, but in a small amount because it is a small structure. Right? That's all, nothing. It is a continuation of the tube. So whatever you have in your intestine, that will go inside the appendix.
So it doesn't like store anything that
No,
cannot
no, it doesn't store anything because it is so small. How it will store the things, right? Your intestine is so long.
Like stones, I don't know how true it is, but I used to hear people say that, like if you swallow something like stone or sand,
No.
it's gonna be stored there.
No, no, no. Okay.
Yeah, because kids glue pennies.
Yeah.
They come out eventually.
Yeah, there.
Goes through the intestine.
Appendix has end artery, I told you before probably, in those areas in our body we have end arteries, the chance of formation or start of the clot, the embolism is more. You remember that I said that, yeah, the clot, after the clot is formed, they can get detached from the wall of the artery and can circulate throughout the body and try to find a good location, right, to get stuck. And good locations are the end arteries, where the arteries end.
Right.
Appendix is a location where the end artery is there. Your central artery of retina, your brain arteries, those are end arteries, okay? So in those arteries, the clot can get stuck. And that's why you hear more appendicitis, okay? If the blood doesn't go, then the tissue will die and the infection will occur, because inside this intestine you have all the materials to cause infection that I told you. That's why you have patches to guard the body.
Professor,
Yes.
do you personally agree that the appendix is kind of a leftover from our evolution?
Yeah, that's.
You believe that?
Yeah, that's why I said developmental anomaly. It stays there.
It serves no purpose.
No purpose.
The steep.
Okay. And small amount of lymphoid follicles are there, but just think that compared to your small intestine,
Yeah.
it's nothing, right?
No.
So if you remove that small amount of lymphoid tissue, nothing will happen. Lacteals are the lymphatic capillaries present in the intestinal mucosa. Specialized lymphatic capillaries in the small intestine. You remember, we didn't talk about the digestive system yet, but if you see inside the small intestine, you'll see finger-like structures in the wall of the small intestine. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Villi, finger-like structures inside the small intestine. And inside your villi, some people say villi or villi, I say villi, the blood capillary and lymphatic capillaries are present, okay, inside the villi. Now, the lymphatic capillaries inside the villi are called lacteals, and they are specialized lymphatic capillaries. Why? You know that intestine, inside our intestine, the absorption of nutrients take place, right? So you have nutrients here, proteins, carbohydrates, fats are here. Proteins, carbohydrates and fats are here. And the nutrients enter into the blood capillaries. We know that blood takes the nutrients, right? But blood cannot take the fat molecules. Blood can take the protein and carbohydrate molecules because they are very small. And the wall of blood capillary has small holes, okay? So the proteins and carbohydrates can enter into the blood capillaries, but most of the fat molecules are large, bigger than the size of the holes in the blood capillaries. So they cannot enter into the blood. Where they enter? They enter into the lymphatic capillaries, because in the wall of lymphatic capillaries you have large holes here. In lacteals you have large holes. So the fat or lipid molecules will enter into the lymphatic capillaries, into the lacteals. It doesn't matter, because you know that finally the lymph will be drained into where? Large veins. And veins are the parts of blood circulation. That means the lymph is being drained into the blood, right? So your carbohydrates and proteins are directly entering into the blood, and fats are indirectly. First going circulating inside the lymphatic system, then going to the blood. But final destination is the blood, right? So your blood is getting the fats from the lymph.
Professor,
Yes.
does it do any modification or changes to the fat?
inside the lymphatic system?
Yes, to make it smaller in structure, like the carbohydrates or protein.
Not really. No digestion takes place inside the lymphatic system. Okay. Now, if you see the wall of the small intestine, the left part of the small intestine, you see many lymphoid follicles. That's the Pear's patch. Pear's patch is the aggregated lymphoid follicles in the wall of the small leg part of the small intestine. Just know that. Okay, so do you have any questions?